welcome back to the Prestige Junkie Podcast. I am Katie Rich. I'm the awards editor here at The Ankler. And this week, my guest co-host is someone who, like me, is preparing to spend many of the first weeks of September seeing as many movies as humanly possible, maybe more so. Sean Fennessey of The Ringer and the Big Picture podcast. Hello.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
Are you in your spring training for sitting through, and we talk about this later, but like you have to just like sit still for 3 hours at a time just to know you can once you start going to film festivals?
Unfortunately, I feel like I've never left the season. I feel like I've been in season since 2017 when I really started doing this. But yeah, I'm stretching more every morning.
Yep.
You know, I'm stretching more every night. I did a 3-movie day in theaters yesterday, almost as like a tryout. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have to really modulate the caffeine intake to get it just right. It takes some doing to figure it out.
I don't stop until 10 p.m. I had a Coke Zero at 8 p.m. last night, so that's where I'm at.
That's living on the edge at this point in our lives. So Sean, we're going to talk about film festival season. You are on your way to the Telluride Film Festival as people are hearing this. After our conversation, listeners will hear my conversation with Will Packer, who is the prolific producer, and his new project is the limited series Fight Night. It debuts on Peacock on September 5th. Sean, you're not too much of a TV guy, so I don't know if that one's going to be in your wheelhouse, but it was pretty good. I had a good time watching it. I recommend it.
I have a lot of respect for Will Packer, so I'll check it out. He is breathless in his pursuit.
Yeah, it was, I got to the end of the conversation, which people will hear, and just kind of asked him, not about like his job producing the Oscars. I feel like he's talked about that a lot. He produced the year of the slap, but just some kind of like what it takes to produce the Oscars in general. And you kind of get the feeling like only a guy this unstoppable with this much energy can handle this job. Like it's a rare breed that can do that.
I can't relate. I really can't. We were just talking about childcare before we really started recording here. You know, we're all just tired. We're trying to get through it.
Holding on by the skin of our teeth. So before we get started, every week on our Spotify feed, we put a poll asking listeners about something connected to the conversation. I talked about the Emmys last week with Chris Rosen and just kind of put the thought out of who should win the Emmy for Best Supporting Actress in a Comedy, because Chris and I dove deep on this category. Sean, I know you're not a huge Emmys guy, so I'm just going to run down the contenders for you and you want to see if you can guess who the listeners really went for.
Okay.
We've got Meryl Streep for Only Murders in the Building, Hannah Einbinder for Hacks, Liza Colin-Zayas for The Bear, Cheryl Lee Ralph and Janelle James of Abbott Elementary, and then Carol Burnett of Palm Royale. Who do you think the audience would have gone for there?
First of all, I just want to say shout out to my homie Chris Rosen. That's my Telluride buddy. That's my guy who I go to so many screenings with. So
I think he's mad he's not doing this part of it, but I made him talk Emmys with me because he's deep in the trenches with me.
I look forward to seeing him. I did listen to your conversation, so I feel like I was influenced, but I'm going to say Hannah Einbinder.
She indeed is running away with 55% of the vote right now, although sometimes this changes by the time this episode comes out. I mean, Chris is a really big Hacks fan, so I feel like he swayed the vote, just like you were saying. But I still think I'm kind of convinced Meryl Streep's going to come swoop in and take the whole thing, because she's also really great on Only Murders.
I feel like Meryl Streep and Carol Burnett in an awards race is like, are they like two magnets, you know, like they can't touch? Like they always win wherever they are. So I don't know. That one seems confusing.
I hope they hang out at the Emmys. Somehow we get to get a glimpse of that in there somewhere.
That would be cool.
All right. So, Sean, as you mentioned, you're going to see our friend Chris Rosen and many other people at Telluride. And we're in this funny period right now where we're all pretending we don't know what's going to be at Telluride. But then thanks to mostly the Toronto lineup, the Toronto lineup comes out and it calls something a Canadian premiere. And you say, aha, well, then where is it premiering elsewhere in North America, Telluride? Or it'll call something a North American premiere and you say, okay, so it was at Venice, but not somewhere else. So we do have like a pretty decent sense of what's going to be there. And I've never been to Telluride. Sean, you're like many people I know, and you're a total diehard. I mean, really, in 5 sentences or less, what is the Telluride thing? Why are people so obsessed with this festival?
It's such a cliche at this point if you listen to podcasts like this one, but it is a truly magical place. I mean, setting aside the incredible geographical beauty that comes with this tucked away mountain town in Colorado, you've got a very conquerable atmosphere for cinephiles. So the entire Film Festival takes place within effectively a mile. And all of the venues are can be reached very quickly. So for somebody like me, who is a genuine psycho when it comes to going to film festivals, all I care about is seeing the movies. I don't hobnob. I don't get like lunch with my pals. Maybe I'll go to 1 or 2 parties, but I am there to see the movies. I view this as essential to the work that I do. And it's also just something, I just love seeing a lot of movies in one day. I love seeing new stuff. I love being excited about something that I didn't know existed. So, I will wake up at 8 a.m. and by midnight, I will have seen 5 movies on 3 of the 4 days. And for me, that's wonderful. That's amazing. Now, if you want to have a different festival experience, if you want to eat at the cafes, if you want to run into the celebrities that are walking the streets wearing beautiful oversized hats, hoping to not be recognized, but inevitably being recognized, that's another appeal. Has that been 5 sentences? How am I doing?
You did pretty well. I mean, there's a lot to like all of those appeals that I've heard about so many times. And, you're too busy seeing movies, being a pure monk of cinema to talk to them. But I does feel like the accessibility of it, not just about the square mile, but like Maggie Gyllenhaal is going to be there, like getting lunch somewhere. Like it's a movie, very glamorous movie summer camp, even more so than Sundance, it feels like. I've been to Sundance, but it feels like there's even more of a high-minded vibe to this whole thing.
Yeah, and I've been to Sundance as well, and I've been to a number of other festivals. And I just find that they are just more challenging in a very practical way. So getting on buses, encountering the weather, like to go at the end of August, I think the forecast is 64 degrees every single day at Telluride next week. I mean, that could go terribly wrong and it could change somehow, but just that fact alone makes it a much more approachable thing. Plus, I live in Los Angeles. It's not as hard for me to get there as it would be for, say, Toronto or Venice. So
it's
that's
not
also
easy
a factor.
To get to, though. Like they don't make it easy.
They don't, but I've got it. I know what it is. My expectations are clear. This is my 5th festival, so I have a very good sense of what it's going to be. I did drive one year, which was insane. It was a crazy choice. I drove straight through 12 hours to get there one day. That wasn't smart, but I did do it. I probably won't do that again. But, just from a pure movie lover perspective, the other thing, too, that I think is important is it's a very expensive festival, but it's a public festival. So if you're able to acquire festival passes before they sell out, you're there with a lot of people who are not industry people. You're there with a lot of people who just love to go to see movies in a public fashion. And I know that's true of other festivals like TIFF, but there's a historical sentiment among the people who live in the community or in the surrounding communities for this festival. It's been around this is the 51st edition of this festival. So I don't know, it's just a special place, that people have a genuine sentiment about it that you don't necessarily find if you're in New York or if you're in Toronto. And nothing against those festivals. I like them both, but this one has just kind of captured my heart.
Well, there's this thing that we talk about a lot, and we're going to talk about in the coming weeks, this idea of festival buzz. And different festivals have a different kind of buzz. And you kind of do have to be there to know it, but also you can keep an eye on Letterboxd and something there. And I do feel like there's a different identity. Like you go to Toronto and you go to the premiere screening of Knives Out and you're like, oh my God, this movie's going to actually hit with people. What does the Telluride audience lend to that sense of buzz? Like what makes something a Telluride like real sensation?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's known for most recently the Moonlight pop, that's really where the film kind of took off and went on this incredible journey to Best Picture. I think that there is a gentle quality to the movies that tend to explode there. I think films that are more transgressive or quote unquote electrifying don't play. The crowds there are a little bit older. You find a lot of retired Coloradoans there. And
sounds great. I would love to be a retired Coloradoan someday.
Me too. I've thought about that. Gosh. But, for my personal taste, I actually, I love genre. I love horror. I love an intense viewing experience. So part of the fun for me going to this festival is catching a movie like Uncut Gems, premiering there and upsetting the audience. I mean, I went to a premiere in a big room there in 19, and people were mad and people were walking out. And I actually found that kind of exciting and electrifying. There's something unusual about that at this place that is so often temple-like in the way that we accept movies. So there's that too. What actually springboards a movie out of Telluride is still a little bit unclear to me. Like I feel like, is it my job to then sing the praises of the movie to raise its status? I haven't really kind of rationalized that with myself. What do you think?
That's a good question. I mean, I think saying, like, so last year, the example I always think of is Anatomy of a Fall. And people are coming out to Telluride being like, there are lines around the block. Like this, it had played at Cannes. It had been a pretty big deal there already. But Neon very cannily said, this is the audience for it. I mean, I think retired Coloradans, like, are going to vibe with Anatomy of a Fall based on what I know of the people in my life. And so it's about just seeing something having that organic level of connection. And even if it's Uncut Gems and there's a rejection to it, that's still a response, right?
Yes.
Like, you want to kind of get the idea of like, all right, here's how it played with this crowd, and then maybe it'll go to Toronto or go to New York after that, and fine tune the experiment a little bit more. That's where I feel like the buzz job comes in for us, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Anatomy of a Fall is a funny one. I didn't see it at the festival last year. I'd seen it beforehand. I think there is another version of that film that we'll probably talk about that will hold a very similar place. Whether or not that movie plays the way Anatomy of a Fall plays, I'm very curious about. That's the other thing that you can find when you're there, is just, what do people think of movies you've already seen? What is the conversation like on Sunday or Monday relative to Friday or Saturday? And it changes a lot. I do talk to some journalists and critics that are there at the time too, and get a sense for what people are thinking. But I don't think it's quite as hive mind or concretized when you're there as it seems to the outside world. I find I'm disagreeing with people or trying to get a better sense of why they think certain things. And also, some of my sensibilities are very classically awards focused, and some of them are just not. And I like that differentiation too.
All right. So is the movie you're talking about the Enora? Is that where you're going? Okay. So so you've seen Enora already, but not at Cannes.
Enora. Have you seen Enora?
No, I have not. So I'm going to see that in Toronto, which, I mean, this is my, like, not having seen it, but having seen other Sean Baker movies, it feels like more of a Toronto movie than a Telluride movie to me. Does that sound true to you? And is that going to make it interesting at Telluride?
I think that's right. I think if it plays well at Telluride, though, and I'm assuming it's going to play at Telluride, if it plays well at Telluride, then I think that it's in a very powerful position this year, is what I'll say.
If it can, like, win over the retirees and also the hip Sean Baker kids, then you've got it going.
I think so. And it may. I think if the audience at Telluride reads its themes the way I think they want to be read, I think it's a very powerful movie for 2025 awards consideration.
That's exciting. I mean, so Cannes holdovers are one big part of the Telluride chunk, and a lot of them will be at Toronto as well, and New York Film Festival. We are pretty much assuming Enora will be there, Amelia Perez, which Netflix picked up at Cannes, Seed of the Sacred Fig, All We Imagine Is Light, Andrea Arnold's Bird. Do you feel like it's not like there's a backlash that comes out of Cannes where something plays at Cannes and does well and people come to Telluride being like, to hell with this movie, we're going to take it down. But the buzz can shift. Like I think Anatomy of a Fall gets more embrace. Parasite certainly does. Do you feel like there's a spot in Telluride where things can bounce off or sink a little bit after their Cannes debut?
That's an interesting question. I think Parasite obviously popped very hard there as well in 2019. That's a good example. That's where I first saw it. And
that must have been really fun.
It was really interesting because I think people knew that it was widely acclaimed and they still were knocked out. I think there was an immediate understanding, like, wow, this is a film that just entered the canon, like right after we saw it. And so that was a very cool experience. That's probably the only time I've had that experience. And I've seen some really good movies over the years at Telluride, but that's the one time where everyone kind of looked around at each other like, whoa. Yeah. That was very, very special. I'm not sure I can think of too many other Cannes experiences where films were either openly rejected or not. I mean, the truth is that they don't program most of the most transgressive stuff. Like, To 10 would not have played at Telluride. That's interesting. There's not a world where a movie like that would have done well. Tends to be something a little bit more genteel.
Well, that's where Amelia Perez, I think, is going to be interesting. Netflix picks that up. It wins Best Actress for 4 of its actresses. It's not a regular prestige kind of movie in any way. And I'm really interested to see how that plays there.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the other Telluride guessing game things, again, this is not official. We have reason to believe there will be titles like Conclave, the Edward Berger movie, which we've seen a trailer for, The Nickel Boys, which no one has seen that I know of. A lot of these movies people have gotten glimpses of. Like, there's a few that are total mysteries. The Piano Lesson, Netflix just put out a trailer for that. Just so on the long list of things that are total mysteries going into Telluride, of what you think will be there, what are you really anticipating?
I'm really, really excited about The End. This is Joshua Oppenheimer's new film starring Michael Shannon about a couple in a bomb shelter seemingly at the end of the world.
And Tilda Swinton's also in it, right?
Tilda Swinton and Michael Shannon. And according to the log line, the couple are in some way connected to the end of the world. And that's all we really know. and Oppenheimer's a really interesting filmmaker, hasn't really made a narrative film quite like this before. I feel like this film has been on anticipated festival lists since 2022.
Yeah,
so,
something like that.
I also don't know anyone who's seen this. I don't really know. This is a movie that I'm not sure strikes me as Oscar bait per se, but it's the kind of thing that I'm really looking forward to, and it feels like it's going to be a Telluride. The other titles that you mentioned, I'm really interested in. I mean, Conclave, I saw an extended cut of it at CinemaCon and was just like, I'm in. This is like a murder mystery inside of the Vatican.
I realized they promoted that at CinemaCon. That's cool that they like think it's going to play like that, like not just an awardsy thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a big contingent of Focus Features titles at Telluride this year. That's my guess, is that you're going to see Piece by Piece, the Pharrell Morgan Neville Lego movie. You're going to see Conclave. Probably not going to see Nosferatu, but I would love it.
That would be
that's
fun.
The kind of movie that's not the kind of movie that usually plays Telluride, but but I think that those movies will be there, and they feel like conventionally entertaining movies as opposed to pure awards plays, but we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, conventionally entertaining is a really interesting needle to thread in festival season, I think. Like we're not getting Gladiator 2. I mean, not that if they announce Gladiator 2 as a secret Telluride screening, I'd be livid because I won't be there. But like the definition of entertaining is different, right? Like it's Parasite, or it's The Holdovers was at Telluride last year, right? Like that's kind of like a crowd pleaser. I feel like you get to kind of set your terms and not be competing with the Wickeds or Moana 2s of the world.
Yeah, I remember Marriage Story being a very exciting, fun movie for people to watch, which is insane when you consider the context of Marriage Story. But people were like, wow, that was great.
I mean, it lived on in memes. Like something about that really worked out. I mean, so Venice is going on at the same time as Telluride. I think last year, your podcast colleague Amanda Dobbins was at Venice. You were at Telluride. This year, I think you're kind of the lone festival representative on your show. Do you get the Venice FOMO when you're at Telluride? Are you trying to see what people are saying about that, or do you get to stay in your own bubble?
First year in a long time that I'm like, did I make a mistake and not go to Venice this year? I don't want to do international travel. I don't want to get on the boats. I don't want to have to worry about all those things. But
the boats do seem like a real hassle at Venice.
It seems like a pain.
Say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, Amanda dispelled some of my concerns when she went, and she had an amazing time. And it's also a legendary festival. I just think that I would say I'm more excited based on what I know about the lineup at the top end. Mm-hmm. Because I want to be in the room for those moments. And I felt similarly last year when you look back on like, The Killer premiering there and Ferrari premiering there. There were a couple titles. Poor Things, yeah.
Was it Poor Things go to Telluride also, or was it just at Venice?
Poor Things did eventually play at Telluride, yeah.
Okay.
And Maestro, and there were a handful of titles where I was like, even if this is a disaster, I really want to see this in this space. And I feel similarly about Joker Folie à Deux.
I was just going to ask if Joker is the big one that you want to be there to witness it.
I think I just want to see a big, crazy Hollywood movie play in that space and see what happens. That's something I'd like to do before I die. And that's, in theory, Folie à Deux is going to be that.
Yeah. How bullish are you feeling on that? Like the Todd Phillips just had a big Variety cover story this week that I thought very interestingly, did not get into the Joaquin Phoenix walked off the set of a Todd Haynes movie thing, which is going to keep coming up. Maybe not right now, but where are you on Joker right now? Yeah,
I felt like that interview was him kind of pre-fencing any questions that were going to come along by kind of setting the stakes. I am an unapologetic fan of Todd Phillips, which is, I know, not a popular way to think about these things as a film pundit these days. I just think despite whatever he says in the press, despite whatever his point of view is on things you may or may not disagree with, I think he's a gifted filmmaker. I think even if he is working in pastiche most of the time, his pastiche is beautiful and tends to move well. And I think he's got his fingers on the pulse of a certain kind of audience that is routinely underestimated. Whether or not he's like a best director candidate, I don't think so. I think it's going to be really hard for them to replicate.
Time.
It did. It did.
We keep referencing 2019, which was like a really great Oscar year, and there was Todd Phillips right there.
It was. I don't think people before that film came out realized it was going to be $1 billion movie. And we have had this stretch now, setting COVID aside, of extremely big movies getting into the Best Picture mix. And this feels like the first year in a while where that may not be the case. I guess maybe Dune Part 2, but aside from that, there are not a lot of heavyweights. So maybe there is still space for Folie à Deux in that way, but I'm not sure. I'm interested to see the movie. I'm interested to see how it's received. Also, it's, in theory, a musical, and those are either like so lovingly embraced or so overwhelmingly rejected that it's probably going to be a 1 or a 10 for most people.
Yeah. That's my other Amelia Perez question, that it's a musical, and just knowing that some people are going to like lose their minds in one way and some are going to lose their minds in a good way, maybe.
Did you have like an emotional response to Joker?
Yeah, I guess, I feel like like my memory of Joker has kind of been erased because the whole pandemic happened since then. But I do feel like there was this like revulsion of like not wanting to spend time with this guy and kind of invariably being drawn in. And I also saw Joker before I ever saw The King of Comedy. Like I knew that it was referencing King of Comedy, but I had not seen it yet. And now I feel like it puts it in a context where King of Comedy does that so well that if I watch it again in Joker, I might understand it better. I might like it less. I don't know. I feel like that might have been the reaction with it. But I think Todd Phillips is a really successful filmmaker for a reason. And he has a power with, I want to say image. He's not like the most visual storyteller, even though Joker really is. Like, I think you're right that people underestimate him at their peril, basically.
I think there's something about writer-directors coming out of comedy, trying to evolve into other modes that always fascinates me. And it frequently doesn't work. But like Peter Farrelly did the same thing the year before Joker. Adam McKay a year later had Don't Look Up, and that being as embraced as it was during award season. So it's just a formula that tends to work. And I do think that the Joaquin Phoenix story is going to be held against it, kind of regardless of how things shake out.
Yeah. I mean, if for like the best actor race, like I think everyone in their head had been like, he won for last movie. Like it's not easy to win for playing the same character. I don't know that anyone ever has, honestly, won 2 Oscars for playing the same role in a sequel. That can't be.
I don't believe so.
But you can't count him out. But I do like, that Todd Haynes thing is just going to linger until it doesn't.
It's a tough story. It's a really tough story.
It's not a great look. I gotta say. Wait, I cut you off earlier though with Venice. You said Joker. What was the other one that you just really wanted to be in the room to see at premiere?
Brady Corbett's The Brutalist. Which is apparently 3 hours. Adrian Brody period piece shot on 70 millimeter. Brady Corbett is 1 for 2 with me. I was not a huge fan of Vox Lux, but I think he's like an enfant terrible, he's like an old school, like I'm shoving it in your face kind of auteur, and I like that. And I want to be in the room when somebody first gets a look at something like that. That's really compelling to me. There's other titles at Venice like Queer and The Room Next Door. Like the likelihood I'm going to love those movies is pretty high. Almodovar. But
The Brutalist
and
is more of a question mark.
Yeah, the question marks are actually what's exciting, the movies that we're not totally sure about. Pablo Larraín's Maria, I think that's going to end up at Telluride too, but that's another movie. Pablo Larraín is really kind of swings in both directions. Sometimes he's really got a handle on the material, sometimes he doesn't. Angelina Jolie hasn't had a big moment in a long time, so that one is compelling to me. There's just a bunch of movies that I would want to see in that environment.
They'll get to you. The season goes on forever. I mean, Queer is going to Toronto, so I will see that there. And that one's another one that I feel like 3 different runtimes have been published for it, and like I don't really remember.
Is it
where
3
it
hours?
Landed. I think it's not, but there was a version that was 3 hours.
Okay.
Or like the Venice website had multiple runtimes for it. And I talked about the book a couple weeks ago in the show with Chris Feil. We both read it, and it's like very interesting, unexpected source material for a movie that's that long. So I'm imagining the movie's going to be really different. But having it come out the same year as Challengers, like it is such a fascinating like puzzle piece to fit into our conception of what the season's going to be.
I wanted to ask you about this, and we don't have to veer too far from festival talk, but
let's do it.
I've had 3 filmmakers now on the big picture. When I asked them at the end of the show what's the last great thing they've seen, they've all said Challengers. This is 3 of the last maybe 5 people that I've talked to.
That's fascinating.
I'm sure that will evolve as the year goes on and people get more excited about more movies. But it feels like the one movie that people have wrapped their arms around, and in the community, so to speak. And I know that it is divisive in some ways, but I think its success makes people feel better about the movie industry this year. And it's been a tough year to feel good about the movie industry. And I'm wondering if it's like already being underestimated in terms of how much time we're going to spend with it because it came out so early and it was pushed from last year. Speaking of Venice, it was supposed to premiere at Venice and it got pushed. I don't know if you're sensing that, if you feel like maybe there's a second wave that could be coming for that movie.
I feel like there has to be a second wave. And honestly, you saying this just now, people bringing it up, reminds me of Everything Everywhere All at Once. Because that is a movie that, like, I don't think it came out. I don't think anyone was really talking about it awards-wise. And then people kept mentioning it. And then all of a sudden. And, like, Challengers is not the same. It doesn't have that emotional pull. Like, Everything Everywhere had that, like, family story thing that just drew people in, like, the same way Parasite did. So Challengers is a different road, but I think you're right. And I what I don't know is, like, so Amazon MGM has it. They've also got the Nickel Boys going to Telluride. Like, it's not like they can only have one, but it's like, all right, where do they put their resources? What are they willing to push? What is Luca willing to do? What is Zendaya willing to do? But I think you're right that it's got to pull even more than Dune 2. Like there's an appeal to it that feels really different.
Yeah, there's a really interesting neither fish nor fowl question about Dune Part 2, which is that this is only the second of what is likely to be a trilogy, but the third film may end up being incredibly weird based on everything that I've heard.
And not made for like 3 more years, depending on how they get everybody back together.
So you'd think that they would be holding their water to kind of award Villeneuve until the third film, but then if they don't award him for this film, do enough people realize that the third film has some extended sandworm iconography that may reach beyond our normal tastes? So I'm interested in that one too, and like whether or not will Warner's like push harder because they know it will be more difficult for 3. I'm not really sure, but I'm interested in that too. Yeah,
it's not a Lord of the Rings situation where the next one's coming right around the bend. Actually, I wanted to wrap it up by talking bigger picture about the year, but I was going to go back to a moment you had on your podcast back in May when everyone thought that the movies were dead, and you kind of came on for like a state of hold the line, like don't everyone give up on movies monologue, which I loved. And Thanks. I think you have been proven right by how the rest of the summer has gone. Like everyone's kind of calmed down a little bit. But do you feel like that terror now mixed with some relief is going to be what defines the rest of this year and carries into Oscar season, that like we got to hang on to our blockbusters, we got to reward movies people actually seen? Is that anxiety still there?
I think within the industry, as far as I can tell, it is, but I do think that everyone has exhaled because of the unlikely success of so many movies. We've now got like 7 or 8 or 9 films that overperformed relative to whatever the expectations of those movies were. That was my intention, literally, when I gave that little speech. I was like, let's just stick with this. Like, let's just appreciate the fact that we actually are getting movies and try to enjoy them as much as we can. And I had no expectation at that time that Inside Out 2 would be one of the 8 highest grossing movies of all time, that Long Legs would make like $100 million. I didn't foresee any of that stuff. So that's been exciting. I do think that something has been proven here, but I don't know what it is. I'm still trying to figure out what it is. Obviously, people still want to go to the movies. Like, I heard you and David Sims many weeks ago on the show just being like, people love to go to the movies.
He's always been the person in my life who'll be like, it's fine, they're gonna come back.
He's been steadfast, and I think he and I both more in the way that they kind of like disassembled a lot of the apparatus to make movies the center of their businesses. I think that was just very stupid starting 10 years ago. And they're starting to reassemble it. But I thought that there would be some pretty significant changes in the aftermath of the success of Barbie and Oppenheimer and the Super Mario Brothers movie. I kept banging that drum last year. I was like, these are 3 movies that are not sequels, that are IP in some ways, but they're not been a previous iteration of them. This never happens, that this is the top 3 movies of the year. So I was holding to this idea that people want to see new stuff. That hasn't totally been proven true. Inside Out 2 and Twisters and Deadpool and Wolverine and all these big movies they are what we were saying about the box office in 2015 and in 2018 and in 2021, where it was like stuff is stuff that's going to win. So I think there's some mixed messaging going on right now, and I'm just still trying to sort it out for myself. I don't know. What do you make of it?
I mean, I think you brought up Long Legs. I was just thinking about Thelma, which is like a tiny movie, but like made money. Like
I think it's Magnolia's biggest movie ever.
Yeah, like that's what, like that idea of like a health in the box office. And like I think August, like it ends with us, like movie I haven't seen. But like I'm rooting for it. Like I'm glad that it's out there making money, even if it's mostly off of like TikTok scandal scheming.
Katie, it's so bad though. It's a really bad movie. I'm happy too that it's successful, because movies like that, audiences need movies like that, but hope just not that movie though.
Yeah, let's do better. I mean, Colleen Hoover's written like 24 books, so they're just gonna keep coming.
They are.
Yeah, I think the variety of it is what's healthy. And like last year, we had Barbie and Oppenheimer in the Best Picture lineup, but we had like this really great Best Picture lineup of a lot of really different movies, and a lot of them did really well. Like Anatomy of a Fall, like made money. And some of that money's coming on VOD, which we can't see, which always drives me crazy. I don't know how much time you spend being mad about this.
I think about it all the time.
It's maddening. And I get that it's good business not to like go tell us that you're making all your money not in the theaters, but like we'll never know. And we deserve to know these things.
It's funny that you bring that up, because I have thought about that as well. The thing about it is, it does take us back to a time where we're not dominated by the idea that a movie is not a success if it doesn't make X number of dollars. Because the other thing is just whatever is printed about a film's budget, you know this, having worked inside the system, the magazine system, the like editorial system.
Yeah.
Like, if none of it is true, everything is massaged, everything is reshaped for long-term taxation purposes, everything is narrativizing. So once you wrap your head around that, the box office just being healthy is the thing that I like. The idea that like movies are doing better than they expected to do is ultimately what matters. Whether movies made $10 billion in a year or $8 billion, I don't think that really is what matters. What matters is that movies are overperforming their expectations and the studios are making more of them. That's really what I want.
That was the thing with the Fall Guy and Furiosa, where I think we were going crazy. It was like, I don't care that Universal overspent on the Fall Guy. Like, who cares?
It doesn't mean anything.
Todd Phillips said that in his Variety piece that we were talking about earlier. He was like, why is everyone paying attention to how much these movies cost? You're not a shareholder. And I was like, you know what? He's correct. Like, if we can get past this and focus on just people going to see stuff and letting it matter in culture, that is where we all win.
Yeah, I think pocket watching is kind of a waste of time. And it makes you feel like, and I understand this as somebody who hosts a podcast that like gamifies a lot of what we do, but being the general manager of Hollywood, like you are a sports team, is just a waste of time. Like, the most important thing is whether or not the films are exciting for me personally. And I like the awards race because what it does is it tends to draw attention to really good work. Like The Zone of Interest just being a film that was discussed for 4 months without awards, that's not something that is likely to happen at this stage.
Zone of Interest did very well as far as I remember.
It did very well. Yeah.
All right. So you made your Challengers prediction, which I think is a really good one. Is there anything else you want to throw out about award season? Maybe we'll check back in a few months and see how you did. Before, we're in this moment where we haven't seen so much of the stuff. Anything is possible. Anything you want to put your chips on?
I'm not counting Saturday Night Out. I'm just not.
I think that's a great prediction.
There's something about it in the trailer. I've said it a few times now, but Reitman is really coin flip for me, where half the time I think he's really onto something. The other half, I think it's like he misfires. But that movie, it is playing TIFF, right? But I think it's likely to play Telluride. And
I think so.
If it wins at Telluride, that will be notable. That will be interesting because it's the kind of movie that there's nothing like it in the mix right now. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
It's a docudrama. It's got a young, exciting cast, and it's about something everybody knows about. Those movies tend to work.
The question is how much it's like comedy can save America versus like a fun time hanging out with these people trying to get something done, right? Like,
I agree.
The tone.
Reitman's best movies are not usually written by Reitman. They tend to be written by Diablo Cody or based on novels. This is something that is, he and Gil Keenan wrote this, so we'll see how that shakes out. But if it's not too pious about the emotional and cultural value of comedy, if it's more this sort of like this thriller about making something, I think Hollywood will connect with that.
Yeah. I changed my flight home from Toronto to stay an extra night so I could see Saturday Night. And also Baby Girl, which is going to be at Venice with Nicole Kidman, another one I'm really excited about. So I got a lot right on this, right, man? Like, I'm coming home a day late. Everyone's going to wonder where I am. So
what's number one on your TIFF hit list?
Megalopolis might be on there.
Yeah.
I was just watching the trailer as we were recording this came out today. Like, I don't think it's going to be an awards thing. Again, this trailer is telling us about how the critics were wrong about Apocalypse Now, so who knows? But I kind of just feel like I want to see it in that environment, like the way you were talking about Venice. Like, I want to see a Nora. I want to do the Cannes catch up on there. I want to see Night Bitch. We haven't talked about that at all.
Yeah.
That's a big TIFF premiere. Like the Amy Adams narrative that we're constantly following. I think that's a good audience for that. Like, I think TIFF being a little bit younger and a little bit broader, like, I don't know that Night Bitch is going to be crowd pleasing, but I feel like it's the right crowd for that.
Agreed. I think there's a story to tell about how good she is, but she's been on a little bit of a cold streak in the last 5 years, Amy Adams.
Yeah. Well, she had the craziest thing happen and not getting nominated for Arrival. And then ever since then, it's been like, how can we get this train back on track? It was like a weird curse that landed on there. And then the last thing I'll say is the piano lesson. Like we talked about it briefly. Danielle Deadweiler has just been like waiting for that huge breakout moment. Like Till, we thought would be that. I think for understandable reasons, it wasn't quite that. She was great. And I saw the TV Glow where she has like 2 lines. She's barely in the movie, but is amazing. So I'm really pinning a lot of hopes on her.
Would not be surprised to hear about her in supporting. And then also, I think there's a chance. What would be cool would be to see Sam Jackson get a tribute at Telluride. That's something that I'm hoping happens because he's one of the leads of The Piano Lesson. He's never been he's only been nominated once for an Academy Award. We just did a Pulp Fiction rewatchables, and we were talking about his extraordinary career. And, for so many people now, he's Nick Fury, but he is one of the signature movie stars of the last 40 years. And I'm not totally sure we think about him that way. And so it would be exciting to just watch someone interview him about his entire career before showing the film, because that's usually what they do at these tributes.
The Telluride tribute's going for like an hour and a half, right?
Yeah, they're long, yeah.
That's where the spring training comes in. You got to really prepare to sit through that.
Well, I watched Yorgos Lanthimos go through it last year, and he seemed just miserable going through every step of his career. And Karin Kusama was interviewing him, and she was very warm and adulatory, and still he was just like, I would sooner hang by both toes than sit through this.
Well, and you figure at that point, he's been through enough award season that he knows, like, this is just the start. Like, if you're tired at Telluride, you better get it together, because you got to go all the way to March, man.
That's what would be fun about Sam Jackson, is he just hasn't been in that position in a long time. So I feel like he would relish it. And he's older. Yeah. He's like 75. So, it would be a cool thing.
Well, I assume you, like me, have the image burned in your brain of him giving Spike Lee his Oscar, and they're just like unfettered joy on stage together. And like, imagine the reverse, where Spike Lee presenting Best Supporting Actor wouldn't make any sense, but they could do it anyway. It'd be great. I would love to watch that.
That would be incredible. And if Spike shows up in that spot, maybe we know which direction things are going.
Well, yeah. Don't you always like it when they tip when Lucas and Spielberg and Coppola gave Scorsese his Oscar? Every now and then they tip their hands to it.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, you'll be covering Telluride on The Big Picture, I'm assuming.
I will.
And, tweeting through it or posting through it. And, we'll have to get you back later in this award season, see how all of our high hopes panned out.
Yes, but not before you come on The Big Picture. So hopefully we'll see you there this fall.
See you there.
Thanks, Katie.
Okay, so I'll be right back in a moment with my conversation with the producer of Fight Night, Will Packer. Now let's hear my conversation with Will Packer. He recently celebrated the 10-year anniversary of his company, Will Packer Productions, and his new project, Fight Night, a limited series about a real heist in Atlanta, debuts on Peacock on September 5th. It is the latest in this string of collaborations he's made with Kevin Hart, who, it's kind of hard to remember, has not always been a star and had a really big breakout in 2012 with the Will Packer-produced Think Like a Man. That's one of Will Packer's many, many secrets to success in Hollywood. He finds talent who's being underestimated by the industry, like Kevin Hart or Tiffany Haddish in Girls Trip, which he also produced, and builds these incredible crowd-pleasing projects around them. He's not only reaching out to audiences who the industry doesn't always know how to reach to, but finding the talent who no one else really knows how to tap into the incredible things they can do. In our conversation, we talked about Fight Night and making this project filmed in Atlanta, where he's made his home for a long time. But the conversation went all over the place. When you talk to Will Packer, you really talk about everything all at once. We talked about how he got the industry to embrace taking risks to kind of break outside of their IP bubble. We even looked back on what he learned from producing the Oscars in 2022. Yes, that was the year of the slap, so he learned a lot. He's got a book coming out in 2025 called Who Better Than You? And it looks back on a lot of these experiences. And I do think when you talk to him or listen to my conversation, you can kind of hear the amount of advice he's got to give to producers who want to follow in his footsteps, or even anyone who wants to understand the shape that the industry has taken over the past decade. So you'll hear it all in my conversation with Will Packer. So, Will, I've heard you talk about when you cast Kevin Hart in Think Like a Man, that you saw something in him that other people hadn't seen, and you thought this movie could bring him to another level. And I wondered if Fight Night feels the same way. I've seen it pitched just kind of reintroducing him as a dramatic leading man. Do you feel like this is like phase 2 of bringing Kevin Hart to a level that people hadn't seen before?
I mean, look, first of all, I feel like I am responsible for all Kevin Hart's success. Let's just start there. Let's get that out of the way. Anybody that says otherwise is just not understanding or paying attention. So you're welcome, Kevin Hart. Interestingly, you're right. When I made Think Like a Man with him, which was kind of considered his breakout theatrical success, he obviously had been around. He was a known entity in Hollywood. He just was not perceived as a star. So I'm always very careful whether we're talking about Kevin Hart or Idris Elba or Tiffany Haddish or some other folks that I've been like there at the start of like their quote unquote breakout role, I'm always careful to say, listen, their talent was already there. I had nothing to do with like their talent, but the platform and the timing is obviously very important. And that is something that I was a part of. So with Kevin, certainly Think Like a Man was that role that announced to the world he could carry a movie on his own and he could be a big old star. I think that this is certainly the most dramatic role that he has done. He is definitely toe dipped in, and he's got some strong stuff out there on his resume where he has taken dramatic turns. But you're talking about 8 parts, fully immersing himself into a character, period piece, immersing himself into a world. Yeah, this is another kind of reintroduction of Kevin Hart and his skill set. I had him reach deep into his bag of tools, if you will, to pull out this character Chicken Man that he, you know, with the help of obviously our incredible showrunner and writers, that he helped to architect. And it's something very different for him. He's obviously, Chicken Man is charismatic. You know, he's ultimately a hustler, con man, numbers runner with a big old heart of gold. And that requires Kevin to, you know, there are moments of levity, right? But for the most part, this is something where it's a very, very serious drama. That was one of the things he and I talked about early on. He was like, hey, man, if we're going to do this, let's do the dramatic version.
You've known each other for a long time. You cast him in Think Like a Man 10 years ago. So what was that conversation like? Do you have conversations like that a lot about how to work together and, you know, where you want to take things?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have it with all the actors that I work with because these are artists at the end of the day. So they're always thinking about, you know, their art, the portrayal thereof, and the reception thereof of their art, right? And so Kevin is no exception. We've done now, I think 8 projects together. We are each other's most frequent collaborators. And so in the course of that, every role, there's a conversation around what are we trying to get out of this? What do we want the reception to be with the audience? And with this one, with Fight Night, I know we thought that we could have an opportunity to surprise people because you think Kevin Hart and a heist and hustlers and the 70s. Oh, this sounds fun. This sounds, you know, comedic. This sounds like a good sit back and laugh time. And we really wanted the audience to lean in and not lean back. And we wanted to pull them in through the interesting elements like this amazing cast, including Kevin, this incredibly rich backdrop of an unsanctioned Muhammad Ali fight, an after party off the books, a casino night, guys that come in and strip everybody down, literally strip the people who are there and then rob them of their jewels. And it ended up being the biggest heist, even to this day, in the history of the state of Georgia, one of the biggest heists in the country. Those elements are things that gets people's attention. And we thought that we could then surprise people with the depth of the role that Kevin would play. And the way that everything that I just said is literally just an entry point into this series.
Yeah.
And from that point, you are then hopefully leaning into this really complex web of very flawed protagonist and an antagonist that sometimes you're going to cheer for.
Well, this story had been told as a podcast, I think 4 years ago, and you had been involved in that podcast too. So when you were doing that and you were telling the story of Chicken Man, the hustler who Kevin Hart's playing, did you have somewhere in your head that this would be right for him? Did you like sense this going to the screen at some point?
You know, it's interesting because the true journey of this project to make it to the screen as a limited series, it started as a feature film before the podcast. I'd heard this pitch. I pitched it as a feature film, and we actually wrote a script. And I'm so glad that it didn't move forward because it didn't. It didn't work. We couldn't really get it there, and I'm glad about that because now that was a much more truncated version of this story. And when you see the series, which I hope you will, you'll see that we're able to go into some really interesting places and explore some depth with these characters.
I mean, that's the thing you hear about a lot these days. Someone has a script and they're like, oh, if you write it as a magazine article, then we'll option it as IP and then we'll make a movie out of it. Or same with a podcast series. Is that a reality you keep encountering? I mean, the idea of just making a straight up feature film based on original material, you've done it, but it's not that common. So how do you kind of navigate that and say, okay, we'll tell the story this way and then get it done that way?
Yeah, listen, you got to figure out. That's my job as a producer, and to all the up and coming filmmakers out there, you got to be creative. You got to figure out a way to make what you are trying to do palatable to the financiers, the studios, whoever it is that will help you to get your story told. These days, IP is king. These financiers, what they're trying to do, you got to think of it from their perspective. They're just trying to minimize their risk.
Sure.
And so if Katie Rich has got an amazing idea, that's cool. It's just an idea from Katie Rich. And, maybe she's done it before. That certainly helps. Maybe she's got talent. That helps. But it's still just like this original idea. If it's IP, though, now it helps to minimize that risk in a different kind of way. Now we're basically hedging our bets because, yes, it's a great idea from Katie Rich, but it's based on something. Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Now, that reminds you that maybe it's based on something that Katie Rich also created. Doesn't matter. It's got a different substance and a different weight when it comes before the folks that are trying to determine whether or not they want to allocate resources for it. Somebody else has already taken some level of risk. And in theory, it worked on some level. And now we're just building upon that in order to make whatever it is you're trying to make.
But that kind of risk aversion you're talking about, that's something you've been pushing up against your entire career. Like you make Stomp the Yard and it does well. And everyone's like, why didn't you make it with us? And you said you tried to. Like, has it gotten any better, the risk aversion? Do people know any better what they want and what's going to do well than they did 20 years ago?
Of course not. It is just the process. The process has just changed, Mm-hmm. But the more technologically advanced our industry becomes, the more audiences change, and we're always chasing audiences. We're always chasing the whims, the attention spans, the interest of real people. And I don't mind that. That's a challenge that I accept. But if you're a big, slow, traditional studio model, sometimes it's hard, right? Because you're just making whatever worked yesterday. Well, that was yesterday. And you got audiences going, yeah, we like that yesterday. Today, it's something different. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So it's different in that from when I first started making projects, in that I've got, a little bit of a different pedigree. I've had some success. I clearly have a connection with my audiences, but I'm still laboring in the same way that producers, directors, writers, actors have from the beginning of the industry, which is trying to convince folks with the resources that this project is worth your time and money, worth you allocating resources towards it. You're going to give me X and I'm going to return Y, and Y is bigger than X. And that ultimately is the name of the business. That's it, guys. There you go, boys and girls. Go out and get rich. Good luck.
Well, you said your audience is changing as technology changes. What does that mean? Like you're kind of adapting to it. You're making these limited series. You're finding audiences where they are, but you're paying attention to these people. Like, what changes have you seen?
The way they're consuming content is the most obvious, right? Yeah. I have films, that I can certainly admit were very successful box office hits 10 years ago that today would only work in a streaming platform because they're the types of projects that, audiences are used to now, conditioned to consuming in that medium. I certainly have, some successful films that I think would continue to be successful in a theatrical medium as well. But for me, when you ask about like the technological advances and how that changes the way the audience consumes, I look at the positive side of that. Mm-hmm. I look at it in the sense that there are more ways for me to get stories out to reach my audience. That's what I think, right? Yeah. That was not an option. Somebody viewing Fight Night on a cell phone wasn't a viable option 15 years ago.
Sure.
It is today. So now that means that if I think that a streaming service is the best way for this and making this available for at-home consumption, I've got an avenue for it. Mm-hmm. I've got a platform there. So that's a good thing. I think about it in a positive way. It gives audiences more ways to consume content. It connects us all in a very different way. We're talking about content more, right? We're consuming more content, whether you're talking about a Will Packer project, a Peacock project, or UGC, right? User generated content on TikTok. It doesn't matter. They're consuming it. They're consuming more. So my job is to try to make content that sits at a place that is comfortable for the consumer.
It doesn't sound like you're scared of TikTok the way that I feel like I've heard a lot of people in the industry feel like they don't know how to get around it.
Scared is not the word I would use. I don't fear TikTok. It is a reality. I accept it. Here's my opinion, Katie. We as content creators, who work in Hollywood, we're always chasing audiences. We're always, wanting to put stuff in front of audiences that they will connect with and characters hopefully they will invest in. You can't be upset when they are connecting with something that you didn't create. You just have to figure out what does that mean for where their tastes are currently. I'm not advocating for Hollywood to suddenly, turn to 15-second narratives as the only way to tell our stories. But I do think we can learn something from the way that audiences are interacting with TikTok and try to use that to our advantage with the way that we tell stories.
Yeah. I am with you in the most part about finding audiences where they are. And my one counterpoint is thinking about theatrical experiences. And I wonder if you think about like seeing Girls Trip in a theater and how there's so few comedies that come out in movie theaters these days. Do you feel like we're losing something there? Is that pendulum going to swing back? Do people still want to go laugh with other strangers in a theater at comedies like that?
Right. What's happened is that comedy's so pervasive now, you get it everywhere. So,
yeah.
You could argue that some of the funniest, movies of the past few years were superhero movies or comic book movies, right? Not traditional comedies. And certainly UGC comedy on the internet is undefeated, right? There's nothing like, when you get that forward in the group chat with that really, really funny 15-second TikTok and everybody laughs and you get the hit text, you know what I mean? It's like, it's the next best thing to going viral. You go viral in your own world. Hey, everybody, look at this, this cat falling out of the tree, right? Like, it's just, I get it. Trust me. And so your counterpoint is certainly well received. It is tough for a movie like A Girls Trip now to cut through because there was something about that communal experience of comedy, but you couldn't get it elsewhere. Do I think the pendulum will swing back? I hope so.
Yeah.
I think that it remains to be seen. I just think the theatrical experience will be different. And I think that one of the challenges that we have to accept as an industry is trying to make the theatrical experience something more than what it has traditionally been. If people are going to get out of their homes and drive and pay the gas prices and get the babysitters and, pay the ticket prices and the expensive popcorn and all of that, then there's got to be something there for them that perhaps wasn't there before.
Yeah.
And that's our challenge.
Do you have any proposals? What do you think movie theaters should do to keep people coming back?
I'm thinking about it. Nothing that I necessarily want to, put out to the world right now, just because I might want them to pay me for it, Katie Rich. Well, I might be working on something. But you know what I think? I think it's about an immersive experience. And I think what you hit on it when you talk about the communal aspect of a comedy, right? Horror is another medium that does very well with that. Certainly, my films have done very well with audiences that very specifically wanted to watch content together and experience it together. Our version of Together Now is, I forward it to you, you watch it, and then you text me back or text the group back, right? I think that we have to figure out how to overcome the dual challenges of getting past this time period where it wasn't perceived as safe to be out amongst big groups of people.
Sure.
And this time period where we as an industry pushed all our chips into, or a lot of our chips, I should say, into this idea of no, stay at home, view it from your phone, View it when you want to view it the way you want to view it. And I'm not dismissive of those efforts. I'm just saying that, we sowed this, right? And so now we have to reap it. So I just think that we now will have to figure out ways to make the experience more than what it has been previously. Because comedy works. Comedy's great. I mean, listen, that's whether it's Girls Trip, Think Like a Man, or Night School, whatever. These these projects, I think, play much better with communal viewing, for sure.
And they last a long time too. Like those things like play on Netflix or, a rental for years and years and years. Like they have a shelf life way beyond even that theater.
They can. They certainly can. If they're done right and if they connect with an audience. Absolutely. And by the way, that's the other thing, is that I don't think about success and failure just in the moment of a movie's release, right? Film history is littered with projects that didn't necessarily do well in whatever the first iteration of release was, but that are considered classics for one reason or another. One of my favorite films of all time is Shawshank Redemption. And that was not
classic
something
example.
that came out and made a lot of noise in theaters and got a ton of critical acclaim at the time. But now it is considered a really quality piece of cinema that has stood the test of time by a lot of people. So that's the other thing. I think that you got to take a long view about this, because before there was TikTok, there was Instagram, and before that there was Twitter, and before that there was Facebook. Like there's always going to continue to be that. Obviously, the advent of AI changes the way that we interact with our content as well.
Yeah.
It will consistently be changing. But you know what won't change, Katie Rich, in my opinion? Good storytelling. And the way you tell good stories. In my opinion, that's the key driver here. And we just got to get more creative in the way we're telling our stories. I don't blame the audiences. I just say the challenge is on us. I challenge us as a creative community to continue pushing the envelope.
Yeah. To go back to Fight Night for a minute, you've lived in Atlanta, worked in Atlanta for a long time. It's become the hub of so much film production over the last 10, 15 years, but it doesn't get to play itself very often. And I loved how much Atlanta looks like itself in Fight Night. How do you see these like houses and neighborhoods that just don't look like anywhere else? Do you feel like Atlanta's like going to come into its own and get to host its own stories and not just be, pretend to be somewhere else for once?
I think so. I mean, look, there's a duality to that, because the good thing about Atlanta being a proxy for other cities and locations is that it brought a lot of film production. And I've been a big part of trying to bring film production to Atlanta. And part of our sell to other companies and filmmakers to come to Atlanta was, hey, Atlanta has a lot of great different looks. It can play a lot of different cities. Now, what I, as somebody who is, a part of the market, a fan of the market, grew up in a lot of ways in the market. For me, I think, well, you know what? Atlanta has its own authentic stories to tell. And I'd love to be a part of it. And Fight Night is one of them. Taraji Henson said on a panel the other day that she's shot in Atlanta a lot, but very rarely is she shooting Atlanta for Atlanta. This is such an Atlanta story. It is, we like to think of it as an Atlanta origin story of sorts, because you see how Atlanta became the powerhouse. You see some of the elements that contributed to Atlanta becoming the powerhouse market that it is today. That's what I would say.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking about the election, I don't think this is like controversial to say you were on, you organized the Black Men for Kamala Zoom. I think in Hollywood, especially in, earlier in the summer, there was so much anxiety. All the fundraising talk was stalled. The vibes have shifted. Everyone knows that. How are you feeling at it from your perspective? Like how are you feeling going into the fall now?
Yeah. Well, for clarity, I didn't organize a Black Men for Kamala call, but I certainly was a part of it. I certainly spoke on that call, and some clips went
viral. I think everybody saw those.
I definitely, was loud and proud of my support of Vice President Harris and Black men specifically as a demographic coming out and getting excited about supporting her because that's such an important demographic. Look, it's an exciting time, Katie. For some people, it is an anxiety-filled time, and I certainly can understand that. There is a lot at stake and a lot at play, but I am emboldened and hopeful about the fact that you now have energy. And by the way, on both sides, you've got energy in this campaign that hasn't been there, in my opinion, in the past couple of campaigns. And the reality, like, you could argue the last presidential election was more about who you don't want in the White House than who you did want in the White House. And you could also argue that 5 months ago, it was very much a battle of who do you hate least, right? And a lot of polls showed that audiences were not excited. Now there is certainly new life on the Democratic side, and the effect of that is that it is infusing some additional life on the Republican side.
Sure.
Because they feel like, oh shit, we got to get it together, right? Like, we knew what we were up against with Biden. This is a new factor. We got to get new energy. Come on, guys. I think ultimately having Americans excited and engaged in the political process is a good thing. I don't love all the vitriol. I don't love all the negativity. I don't love the way that manifests. But I do think having people engaged and excited, and certainly you know what side I fall on. I fall on the side of thinking that we've got an historic moment right here ahead of us, and we need to grab it. We have an opportunity to do something that no other major country in the world has done, which is to put a woman of color in the seat of highest power and someone who is extremely qualified to do so. We're leaning into this process, this campaign, and this election. That's a good thing. I'm hopeful that you will see a bigger turnout than we have seen in recent elections. I'm hoping that there will be far less apathy, that people understand the stakes and how important it is. That's my hope.
Yeah. I mean, and to bring it back to Hollywood, you're talking about the pessimism we've seen in politics that you want to push past. It kind of feels like you feel that way about the industry, like post strikes, AI looming. There's this sense of like no one knows where to go. But you seem like an optimist that, you know, as you were saying, like great storytelling will win out, that the industry will figure itself out once again.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I am an optimist. I'm also a realist. And this is a tough time in our business. I don't want to sugarcoat or brush past the fact that a lot of folks in our industry are struggling right now. We as an industry are still, frankly, trying to overcome the effects of COVID, of the pandemic, honestly. And then to have dual work stoppages, and then to have, you know, the threat of another potential work stoppage this year, along with the constriction of content, the natural constriction of content as the streaming economic model has not panned out the way that a lot of folks hoped that it would. The combination of all that, what that means to the, you know, Joe Blow grip or, you know, Sally sound mixer, that means that they're just not getting the calls that they once did. That means that they maybe can't work in the city in which they live. They've got to travel further for work. I am very empathetic to those folks because those are the people. It's not the Will Packers or the Bob Igers or the Tom Cruises
the Kevin
that
Harts.
are the heartbeat of the industries, or the Kevin Harts. We're not the heartbeat of the industry. Heartbeat of the industry are the folks, the hard-working folks that are helping us to create this content that we're spearheading. And those folks are having a tough time right now. And I know that. I am very aware of that. That said, you are right, Katie. I am an optimist. And the optimism comes from the fact that consumers still through, you know, polarizing elections, through wars around the world, through very tough economic times, they're still looking to entertainment and storytelling as a release and as an escape. That's our opportunity. That's the opportunity for us.
That's like a stump speech. I feel like you got like a rally.
Vote for Packer.
Before I let you go, I do want to ask about the Oscars, and maybe not what you think I want to ask, because less about your experience and more the job of a producer of the Oscars, which I think is something that even people like me who follow it really closely don't fully understand. What do you think that we don't get about what it takes to produce the Oscars, and like what can we learn about what we should look for in the future about who should take those reins? Like what don't we get about how hard that was or what you had to do?
It's fine. I laugh because when you say, what don't you get? What doesn't the average person get about how hard that was or what the Oscar producer has to do? The answer is everything. You don't understand. You know nothing, Jon Snow. Okay. You know nothing about what it takes to put on a show of that size, scope, and under that level of scrutiny. Probably the biggest thing is the scrutiny, is the fact that it's the show that in an era of live award shows being dinosaurs, it is the show that gets the most attention still. And the show that everybody's got an opinion about what should and shouldn't be done. I mean, everybody. I don't care if you're a blogger in Australia or an actor in Hollywood or somebody that works in finance in DC. It doesn't matter. You got thoughts about the Oscars and what, quote unquote, they are or are not doing right. Now, that being said, I am very grateful for the opportunity that I had to take the helms of that show as a producer to come in. I do think that there are two thoughts I have about it. One, it is a producerial undertaking. It is something that a producer who, by definition, we manage projects and people. We put them together, right? We're not, traditionally directors, writers, actors. We are putting together the folks and putting them in position to then execute on a narrative, on a piece of content. That's what you need. You need, in my opinion, you need somebody with a producer's brain and skill set. I also think that you need a consistent voice and leadership year after year, because it's really difficult. There's so many things that I learned in doing it my first year that if I were to do it a second year, there's so many things I would do different. And I think so many things that I would do better. I'm very proud of the show that we put together, and very proud of our efforts. And I'm even very proud of the final product. However, there are things that I learned. And when I've talked to other people that have done it, they're like, yeah, but once you do it, you're so tired and worn out and you need a break that you're like, I'm done, right? I'm washing my hands of it. And really what you need is somebody who can be like a career producer of the Oscars. And we had that, right? That was a thing, at one time. You have legendary, Oscar producers who produced it year after year. Gil Cates, you have people who have done it who have been excellent. And I think that, it looks like the Academy may be leaning more into that kind of a consistent producing team behind the Oscars going forward. I actually think that's a good thing.
This show is edited by Brett Fuchs and co-produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Sean Fennessey. Get the Prestige Junkie newsletter by going to theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, where you can answer this week's poll. You can subscribe on Apple or anywhere else you get your podcasts as well. We will see you next week.